Sorry, I'll have to start again. No, it's okay, I won't. So we want there to be boundaries, and either to be safe or to feel that we can break them if we need to. If there are no boundaries, there's nothing to break through, nothing to achieve. It's what Steve Jobs was about when he said, we're here to put a dent in the universe. Otherwise, why else even be here? Okay, you can only put a dent in something that has a boundary. I'm not going to go into the why, which is a very spiritual thing, which I'm not going to. The only why I can think of is that our parents made us, but I'm not a very spiritual person. I'll get no further than that. On the other hand, Elizabeth Holmes believed that there were no boundaries. Elizabeth Holmes is the one who started that health technology company that claimed to be able to get enormous information from a tiny bit of blood. She's had her trial. She's going to go to jail, but she believed there were no boundaries. She was wrong. She said, claimed that living proof that it's true. She said she is living proof that it's true, and that if you can imagine it, you can achieve it. That is, I think, the American dream. If you think it, you can do it. Anybody can be president of the United States, as long as you have loads of money, etc., etc. But that's not part of it. There's the thing called the secret, which is wanting something and you can get it. There are no boundaries, okay? But imagining something doesn't make it true or become true. It makes it exist in one's mind. And so paradoxically gives it a border. So does imagination have a beginning? Is there a first cause? And this is where I'm going to mention Morris, because where is he? Morris is on this screen. Oh, there you are. Oh, thank you. No, because about 2 months ago, Morris said something that made me think. So that's good. Yep. No, because we were talking about, I don't remember exactly. I'm talking about questions, and Morris said, was there a first question? Which is a very good question, but that was not the first question, and it made me think about boundaries. And of course, there isn't a first question. There can't be. It's like asking, was there a first man, woman, whatever? Was there a first person? Sorry about that. So it seems then that there are no boundaries, no limits. The notion that every event is always a comma, never a full stop. This makes any philosophical position problematic, by the way, because there is no last theory, no last book, no last word, and no truth. There is a similar problem in science, by the way, that scientists are a bit more hubristic than philosophers are, or at least a lot of philosophers anyway. Scientists, a lot of scientists go for the truth. We are looking for the last thing, a theory of everything, but that is wrong. Because what they really should be saying is we're looking for the next best explanation, because there's going to be another one coming along. That's for sure. So anyway, I've got to. Olga, you're there. Thank you for the quote. And if I may just read it out. Olga sent me a quote that is, where is the beginning of the end that comes at the end of the beginning? Thank you, Olga. That is from Fruits of Reflection by Kozma Prutkov, I believe a fictitious author invented by Tolstoy, etc. Right, Olga? Thank you for that. Okay, but there is a wall. There is the wall, and the wall is, of course, what I call nothing, with a big N, that we know about, but we don't get to it. that nothing is the absence of everything, and that is death. That is the wall. The point is that we never get to it. We never know that we get to it. Everybody else knows that everybody else gets to it. But existence itself has boundaries. There is birth and there is death. Those are pretty good boundaries. But even that wall, the wall of death, people have always been trying to get rid of it. Always. Even now, the latest is, of course, Jeff Bezos, who is in an effort to vanquish death. He's got a new anti-aging company. Okay, this is an effort to stop cells dying. But he's just one of the latest. All religions and all faiths and all cults tell you that they can avoid death, or if you get to death, you can move on. There's paradise, or there's hell, and there's reincarnation, and even the Christian scientists say, well, you don't really need to die. You don't need to. If you do, that's bad luck, but you don't really need to. But no Christian scientist has lived longer than X years to tell us that it actually works. But it's always going to work. Okay, so death is not part of life. It is not the border within life. It's after that, and we just won't know. James Cook, yeah. James made a very interesting remark last week. Is it okay, James, if I go into it?
Oh, all right, thank you.
No, James made a very, very interesting remark, and that I thought about after, and it is really what prompted me to do today's session together with what Morris said, and it seemed a good time to do it. We were talking last month about freedom, and I was saying that there are boundaries, there are walls, and that's the end of freedom. And after that, there are other walls. And James said that no, there are no real boundaries. If I'm right, James, that you said that even in a prison cell, you are free. And afterwards, I thought about that, and I thought that's extremely interesting. And basically, funnily enough, although I disagreed at the time, but I do now agree. And the difference between us was that the optimism versus the pessimism. You talked in a more, I think, spiritual way, that if you're free in your mind, there are no walls. If that's how it went. I actually I sort of agree with you. In fact, that actually it's freedom within context, and so we are free within the boundaries we have set up. All boundaries are in their context. So my contention is that there are no edges, no absolute boundaries, since I don't think there are absolutes at all. If there are no absolutes, there cannot be absolute boundaries. I'm going to, as we move along, present various boundaries and show why they are temporary boundaries, i.e. approximate boundaries. An approximate boundary cannot be absolute. Okay, so the closer we get, the more we see, and the further away is the boundary, right? There is, for example, there's no such thing as a straight line. It is straight from a distance, but the closer you get, you see the dots that make up that line, and that is with everything. Look, if we think of something very, very pragmatic, think of the borders of a country, which you see on a map, and you can see the line. But if you actually get to the border, the exact line does not exist. Is it the stones, and which part of the stones is it? There's no exact boundary. The boundary is theoretical. And the fact that there are no boundaries, but real boundaries between countries is what sets countries off warring against each other. Okay, so let me go to something from analytic philosophy and logic. The excluded middle. This is a supposed contradiction, that you can't have P and not P. You can't have is and not is. It's either one or the other. You can't. These are contradictions. Okay, so a statement is either true or false. There is no middle ground between being true and being false. Every statement has to be one or the other. The principle of ambivalence states that every statement is true or false. Example is, you are tall, is either true or false. Whereas the principle of excluded middle states that if that it's a contradiction to say that he is tall and not tall. Presumably, supposedly, there is a border here. And I say, no, there isn't. And this is where analytic philosophers do not like what I'm going to say, because it is not a contradiction. It is a matter of time. It's not a matter of logic or a paradox or a fallacy. It's a matter of time. It is the impossibility of two things happening at the same time and place. It's not a matter of logic, it's a matter of time. There is an Aristotelian law of thought, is a law of identity. A equals A. Right, that's an absolute as far as you're concerned. This seems blindingly obvious, lying at the very heart of all thought. We are told that if the propositional contents of all thoughts weren't equal to themselves, then thought itself would cease. We are also told that if we didn't know that one thought was identical to itself when expressed at a different time, then this would certainly impact on thought itself. I disagree. I disagree. If A equals A, it means that they are the same. They are the same thought, and it cannot remain over time. What you think today might have the same words as what you say tomorrow, but they will not be the same. About 6 months ago, I showed you that 2 plus 2 is 2. Those of you who were here then will remember that. I won't do it today, but if 2 is the same as 2, then it can't be 4. 2 equals 2 is 2, because that's what 2 is. 2 equals 2. But I won't go into that today. That was, I thought, quite fun. Okay, so there is a basic problem with definitions, defining anything, since that is by definition setting boundaries. Words are approximate. That is, their borders are fuzzy. They work according to context, which is itself approximate. Between words, there is space, what I call nothing. Nothingness is the absence of something. And it's the same with borders. Okay, if objects have borders, shapes, then the surrounding space has a border. The border is the object. So objects are defined by the spaces that separate them and exist because of time that unites them. Now, my question is, first of all the people who do not have their videos on, would they please put them on? I really do want that. There has to be a good reason why not. I see everybody's really listening to me. This is great. Nobody's done anything. Okay, so now my question is, if objects have borders, do subatomic particles have borders, or are they defined once found? The answer would be that they don't have borders, and when they're found, they don't have borders either. The point is that they aren't points. It's the only way that we humans can imagine a particle, but it's not a point. And so we can't even talk about borders with subatomic atoms. So if we change boundaries, by the way, reactions are altered. They're very interesting. In 2008, two economists did an experiment in a cinema. Anyone who ordered a large bucket of popcorn was given 4 separate bags instead. Same popcorn, same amount, same price. What happened next? They discovered that cinema goers ate less popcorn because there were no borders. And they, every time they had to go popcorn, they had to go through another border, which is quite interesting. You will notice that as I talk, a lot of my talk has to do with time. And as you know, those of you who know me, who've read my stuff, know that time for me is a basic element of life, of existence, of everything. So I won't go into that today. I've done it quite a few times, but the present now seems clear, right? But it isn't. When did this present start? When does it finish? Are we here now? Is there a now? Of course not. It's gone. It's always gone. So time is a continuum. I say that present is never here, but I won't go into that argument today because you'll all leap at me. That'll be on another occasion. And where did the continuum start? Where does a continuum start? It starts at birth. That's where our continuum starts. If we sit and watch paint dry, or we watch the sun go down, where does one become the other? At what point does the sun disappear? We never see it disappear, never. Watch it next time when there's sun. Watch it. You will never see it going down. And you will never see the paint go dry. There is a continuum here. There is no border. Okay. Now, the division to the future is an impossibly possible one because it's based on the past. The future is based on our experiences, and hence there is not an infinity of possibilities. Now, every time I say this, I get into trouble because people tell me there is a future. Now, I am not saying there's not a future. There is a future. The only thing is we never get to it, never. When we get to what we saw was the future is really the past. Now, at what point is there a border between one and the other? There obviously isn't because it's a continuum. Okay. This is unlike Sartre's "Not Yet," where the future is only a possibility since we will never get to predicted events and therefore cannot predict a future. We will never get to it. But the point is, it's not a not yet. It's actually a not ever. So if I say that John was at my house last year, who is it that John was? Is it the same John as the one I'm talking about now? He was at my house. He's not now. Is it the same John? When was the change? And why? Because he left my house? Obviously not. But what if time is cyclic? Those of you who've seen the film Groundhog Day know that where events happen again and again. Even here there is a continuum and not separation. Groundhog Day presents the possibility as a challenge, but also an opportunity to imagine what the best versions of ourselves could be, even if the world around us remained the same. Nietzsche, on the other hand, imagined an eternal recurrence in which nothing changed. Every little detail of our lives was relived in exactly the same way for eternity. He recognized the idea was terrifying, but he also saw it as an exercise in affirming our experience, even the most horrible aspects of it. By the way, there's a good book called Kurt Vonnegut's Timequake. Very, very good book where we have exactly that problem, that things go on and on and on and do not change. It's very, very, very much worth reading. Now, if I say I know nothing, that seems to have a border, right? But it means that I know something. It cannot include not knowing of one's own existence. So that would have applied to Socrates' statement, I know that I know nothing, since he certainly knew something. In fact, he knew two things. He knew that he knew something, that nothing, something being nothing, and that he knew that he existed. He couldn't have known anything unless he existed. So we are back to causality. We have to think about the beginning of time. We have to think about the Big Bang. We have to think about God. And I just must say that the notion that time and everything else began from nothing is crazy. Nothing, the absence of everything has no potential to do anything, to start anything. It's just nothing. So we have history that and periods, etc. The Renaissance, Age of Enlightenment, etc. Where are the borders here? These, as Frank mentioned last time, Frank's not here today, that these eras we only look at afterwards and say, well, here's the Renaissance, here's that and that, but those borders don't exist while you're in it. Are we in the modernistic era today? So that's what they say. If people know what it is, that's what they say. So the toppling of statues, by the way, is an endeavor to cancel past events. It is make boundaries in what had happened. It ignores the historical context in which those people lived. That's a very contentious thing, and we once had a meeting on that. Every age, by the way, has inspired criticism, destroying borders and setting up new ones. Plato tells us that Socrates complained that the advent of writing was destroying memory. The music of the Beatles was once considered a kind of barbarism. So was the music of Wagner. Okay, when novels were new, they were supposed to rot young women's brains. Writing destroyed oral poetry. Pop music destroyed the symphony. Was there a border between one and the other? How am I doing? Okay, not bad. It has become increasingly fashionable to smudge borders between art on its own merits and the sins of the artist. In 1977, the French theorist Roland Barthes announced the death of the author. Okay, for a text to be truly liberated, he said, it needed to be freed from the tyranny of authorial intent. We've actually since traveled a long way. Today, artistic judgment hinges almost entirely on the identity and intent of the artist. Borders, borders, borders. There is also the opposite, by the way, fuzzing the edges. The European Union advised member states to stop using the phrase Happy Christmas and instead to say Happy Holidays to avoid offending non-Christians. But this surely, or maybe not, disrespects each country as it is structured through making them uniform. So when we get to approximation and fuzziness, where is the border between reason and unreason? How do we as individuals know where that is, or even know that there is? And since I mentioned something for everybody here, I'm now going to mention something about law. Judges have the power to put justice before the law, a power they have exercised for hundreds of years. Authoritarian governments have always hated them for this. It's the line between justice and law that lawyers have to deal with. I think I'm going to let you now join in. I just want to say is that the thing is that we don't know how real a border is until we have passed through, and it is no longer a border. Time again. So, so I did it in what I wanted to do, more or less. And now I open the floor. Oh yeah, the rule is the following. If you want to talk, anybody can do, it's very fluid here. Anybody want to talk that you've got yellow, I already see them. You've got little yellow hands that go up, and I can see them. I will try to do in the order, but I can't promise because I don't see when they go up. And please, because we are quite a few this evening, could you please speak as shortly as possible? And Susan and Brenda and Jeff do not have their videos on. If you could please put them on, I'd be very obliged. It's much, much nicer and more sociable. Thank you very much. The first one, I think, was George, and then Morris.
Yeah, I did have my hand up and I brought it down. So if you don't mind, Maurice, if I can go, is that okay with you?
Yep. And I didn't see it go down, so go for it.
Yeah. Thank you, Maurice. You're very gracious. Thank you. Thank you. So interesting discussion, Ron. If I can call you Ron.
You can. That's my name. You can call me anything
you,
else as well.
Thank you. So, I believe, okay, that borders, everything is dialectical, everything interacts, okay? And yes, borders are temporal. They're temporary. They are in part a manifestation of the way that we intuitively see the world. So we intuitively see tree, we intuitively see car. However, I think my view is you're taking this to a nihilistic or a highly pessimistic turn, which is to say nothing of value exists. So, the reason I even come into this is because then the ultimate claim is, to me, is that justice doesn't exist, right? So if tree doesn't even exist, if car doesn't even exist, then certainly justice doesn't even exist. And so, again, I view this as a nihilistic, unnecessarily dark turn that, in my mind, really negates the whole of human history, which is that things do matter to humans, and they matter in a very real, concrete way. And things do exist, even if they're simply temporal, they do exist. So, again, in my mind, you're taking I would submit respectfully, a nihilistic turn, perhaps an anti-enlightenment turn. Thank you very much, Ron.
Thank you, George. I just want to ask you, did I say that things don't exist? I'm only talking about borders, and that borders really make things exist rather than no borders. So I'm all for existence. I'm a very big existence bloke, really. I'm all for it. I would never say that things don't exist. So
can I respond?
Yes, please do. Yes.
I think, but the implication in listening to you is that precisely because things are temporal, there is no there. In other words, again, the fact that things disappear, things that happen only in a moment of time, listening to you, right? One can't help but walk away with a very pessimistic sensibility, really, in the final instance, that there is no such thing as knowledge. That is, I believe, the implication of your very well thought out and kindly delivered discourse.
I'll get back to you, because there's one, apart from believing in existence, there's one thing I do not believe in that you said I do, is that we live in moments of time. That is the exact opposite to my whole theory of time. There is no moment. There is no now, but everything is a continuum and continues. well, continues, yes, but that's the point, and that things exist because they continue until they stop continuing, and that there's only one point that they stop continuing, and that we don't know when that is. But
where does that leave us with knowledge? Where does this leave us with the question and theory of knowledge?
What's the problem with knowledge? Knowledge continues. Knowledge is not absolute. Knowledge is personal. I don't believe in absolute knowledge. I don't believe in the truth of knowledge. But that's a complete different discussion, which we had once, and we're obviously going to have it again because people always come up with that. But if that came across, that's strange to me because I believe the exact topic. But thank you for pointing that out. I'll get back to you with that, George. Okay, thank you. Now, Morris, your turn, and then we've got and then Melinda, and then Michael's disappeared. Michael, I keep on people. It's amazing, things wander around here. Ah, good.
Now, I will keep it very, very brief, and just to say that I was getting a bit worried when you were talking about the continuum. And there's the lack of, or there aren't borders, thinking to myself, is there nothing that separates me from Ron Green? Or are we, Ron Green and I, on the same continuum? But I hope there is a border between us, as indeed there is between each of us and everybody else. That is to say, as we see the world, as we see ourselves, as we sit and think about philosophy, we have a border, and that border is around us. So I don't know exactly how to express that. It's a border of each individual. How does that fit in with your continuum?
You'll have to reread the book, Morris, because I deal with this precise point that between objects there is what I call nothingness, which is the absence of something. If there was no border, then we would be the same. We would be the same. I am not the same as my desk. Between us, there's a space, and that space makes. Well, we'll talk about us. There's a space between us. You are you.
Can I assume, therefore, you're sending me a complimentary copy?
You've already bought one, so you're not going to get another one. And I don't give complimentary to anybody. So don't ask. So no, the point is that there is a difference between us because there is a gap. That I mentioned that two things are the same mean that there's only one of them. And the point that you are you and I am me is there's a gap between us. And that nothingness is the absence of something. The gap is the absence of you, and the gap is the absence of me. That is what makes us different. It is the gap. It is the gap between
Vive
words.
la gap.
Exactly. The gap between words, the gap between all of us. Thank God there's a gap, otherwise we'd all be the same. Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Melinda, I said, and then Michael.
Thanks, Ron. Well, this is very interesting, of course. I have three little points to add, perhaps. First, I was conceptualizing this with Cher last night, and I think one challenge that we are faced with in human society is linguistics, in the sense that we don't have yet the capacity to perceive a difference, to perceive a non-difference of time. And by that, I mean, we perceive things as having edges and borders because we have not yet developed, we human beings have not yet developed an intellectual capacity to think beyond that, to think beyond time and space into essence. So when you just said, I am not my desk, well, the difference there is that the molecules that make up a desk and the energy sources that make up the molecules that make up the desk are the same energy sources that make up everything. And therefore you are your desk, but your head is too round to be your desk. So it is a perception of moment. And so I agree with that. And last night I woke up thinking about this in the middle of the night. And so because I'm an artist, I'm going to do the artist thing. Joni Mitchell, this woke me up in the middle of the night. And she has a relatively obscure song, the first verse of which is, out on some borderline, some mark of in between, I lay down golden in time and woke up vanishing. Sweet bird, you are briefer than a falling star. All these vain promises and beauty jars, oh, somewhere with your wings on time, you must be laughing up on this feather, laughing. And what that speaks to me of is this perspective beyond the limitations of the physical entity in which we find ourselves now. And I think the mistake we make is assuming that the physicality that is in what you're talking about, the now, is limited to our perception of the now because we haven't intellectually, aesthetically been able to perceive of beyond the now. So that interests me very much. I think also we're stuck in this Cartesian duality. It is or it isn't. And I'm not sure that is, and then we get stuck in reality because we have to define what is reality, and it is and it isn't. And Ron, when you say there is no moment, there is no now, I would say there is only now. And the perspective of now is limited by our human brain. Henry, are you talking? Do you want? I'm sorry. Anyway, that's my artist's idea. When you mentioned toppling the statues, I don't think it's an attempt to erase the past. I think it's an attempt to deglorify the past, to give a different perspective on the past and to not have that be a part of the background of glorification. So I think all kind of liberation movements that I'm aware of in the last couple of centuries have to do with that, with deglorifying power systems that have developed. And then I really was very interested in your comment about the borders between reason and unreason that attorneys and lawyers approach. And I am not a philosopher very much, but of course, John Knowles and that very famous Justice's Fairness treatise approaches that idea that justice is not an absolute, and justice and fairness are the balancing points of what is going on at this present now and what could be going on at other nows. So I think that that's one of the roles of art, frankly, is to present imagined nows that exist simultaneously with what many people experience as now. and to help expand the sentient capacity to imagine something that is untimeless, untimed. So those are my thoughts right now. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Melinda. I could argue with every one of those things you said, and I won't. I won't. But there's only one thing I'm going to argue with. It's not controversial, so we're not going to quarrel, although we could. But you said that we are not yet in a place where we can understand what things really are, something like that. And I find that no. Well, what you're basically saying is that somewhere out there, there's the real thing, and we yet cannot get to it. And that I do not accept in any way, because you're talking about some idealism. You're talking about something that is out there, an absolute objectivity. If we find that, we'd all be okay, because we'd all see the same thing. We'll never see the same thing. And everything has to be subjective, because that's the way we're built. And I do not ever accept the fact that we are not yet at the place where we need to be, because we will never be there, because we're human. That's the only point that I'm going to argue with at the moment. I'm sure there'll be more later, but that's the big thing. The thing about now is a very, very big thing for me. And if you have read my book about time, I explain it in great detail about why I don't think that there is such a thing as now. So, but thank you. We're gonna. I know.
And for the non-Brits who don't know what your book is, what is your book about time?
Oh well, Americans know what it is. So how come you don't? Really, the whole world knows.
I must not be an American, because you know, here I am.
It's true. It's called Time to Tell. I look at how we tick, literally. So thank you very much. And Michael, please, everybody, keep things as short as possible, because there are lots of us. There's only one of me.
Yeah, it's a so rich topic. Thank you for choosing it. But I have a couple of comments. So one is that when you are saying that there are no absolute boundaries, or someone is saying this, I want to ask, are you absolutely sure that there are no absolute boundaries? Because
I'm approximately sure. I'm approximately sure that there are no boundaries in maths either.
Right. So I just wanted to caution that probably there are some boundaries. Probably they are not absolute, but for our practical purposes, maybe they are.
I agree.
And we have to treat them as they are. Sometimes, but maybe there are exceptions. So I just want to emphasize that our knowledge and our theory of the world is also approximate, most likely. Again, most likely, I'm not sure. But anyway, one comment is about this physics question, that there are no boundaries between the fundamental particles. And the issue is that if we consider our classical 3D dimensional space, yes, in this space, maybe there are no boundaries. But this is not the space which we have to use to describe the quantum system. Because there are boundaries in energy space, there are these quantum energy levels, and they are very strict, and in some class of systems. Then there are boundaries in, say, that you cannot have two electrons or any two fermions that take the same quantum state. and this is sort of absolute rule. Again, it depends on how you understand in what space you consider this issue of boundaries. And I think that this relativity principle is relevant here, because it's not that absolute versus not absolute, but absolute versus relative. So they can be absolute in a certain reference frame, but relative and not the same in other reference frame or in other space in which you describe the system.
I agree with you 100%, almost approximately 100%, because I said that that it is in context. Every boundary is a boundary in its context. So I agree with you.
Yeah, I agree with this clarification. Yes. And my last point is that about the boundaries that we impose on the world, that our perception is imposing on the world. And I think this is just my hypothesis. But I think that these boundaries and our tendency to impose these boundaries is based on that our thinking is action-oriented. So at the end of the day, we have to make a choice. We have to take action. To do or not to do, to be or not to be, to avoid something or not to avoid something. Is it something the enemy or the friend? And we cannot do both things at the same time, because we are operating in this classical reality that does not allow the system to take two different states at the same time. So we have to make these binary choices all the time. And I think this is also very relevant to what Melinda alluded to, that it's linguistics. So most of our communication, our relationship between each other is language. And language is information. And information is from bits. I don't know if the world is from bits, but information is definitely from bits. So it's all the result of multiple binary choices. Every time when we are saying something, we make this multiple binary choices. And in some cases, our boundaries, internal mental boundaries, reflect the real boundaries. In other cases, this is just gross simplification, or maybe they reflect some approximate boundaries, but we have to make those boundaries, even if they don't exist in the world. So that's my last point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Now we're going to go like this: Julie, and then we're going to have Bill, and then you keep on moving around here, and then we're going to have James. That's okay, and we're going to move on from there. So remember that, because I've already forgotten it. So Julie, hi.
Okay, hi. Yes, thank you, Ron. I really like this topic, and really enjoying the conversation, everybody's contribution. So this is something that I think about frequently as well. And my way of coming to terms with this is to think of this in terms of our different cognitive systems. I think that we have, according to cognitive science, we have two qualitatively different cognitive systems, system 1 and system 2, the intuitive system and also the analytic system. And I feel like for as long as we live, we're always going to have to live with this duality. We're never going to be able to get rid of boundaries altogether. We're always going to differentiate things. Our practical mind, our intuitive mind, our way of living, we're always going to differentiate between this thing and that thing, the past, the future. But when we put our analytic mind to something, the boundaries kind of disappear, because there's no logical way to come to a boundary. At that point, I think we start to see a continuum, and there's there's no rational way to come to like what is that actual point that's the actual boundary. So I think when we put an analytic spotlight, we use that part of our cognition. We can't understand boundary. The human mind's not really capable of understanding like where does that line actually exist. But I think in practical terms, when we flip back to our intuitive mode, we're always going to see boundaries and we have to live with boundaries. So I think that's why we live in paradox.
Thank you very much. Very nice. Thank you very much. So we got, did I say Bill next and then James, right? Was that what I said? Yes.
Fine, I can do that.
Yeah.
Ron, I'm wondering, as I sit here now,
I think
the question, and I'll try to give you an answer. Is there a difference between interverbal behavior on the one hand and scientific behavior? The rules of interverbal behavior are what you've been discussing in terms of boundaries. They are conceptual. They are not really attached to anything but other words. So if you have a boundary or not, or if you have a interpretation or not, if you have a metaphor or not, is something that's exclusively interverbal. And discussions that are verbal are not empirical in the way that science is. In other words, to take the notion that there's a system 1 and system 2, our intuitions, I would suggest, are basically interverbal. We sit there and say, well, that must be true if that's true. Now, that's not science, that's interverbal connections, interverbal linkage. Whereas scientific behavior, on the other hand, is very much more specific. It's grounded in evidence. It's grounded in what, if you will, the empirical world, how the world works. They're different. And I think what's happening in this conversation is that we're getting confused with the existential reality that you don't dispute and interverbal reality, which we all know how to do as philosophers, lawyers, and conversationalists. So I think that distinction helps me sort the differences that we were talking about here, because you'll get boundaries, you'll get concepts, you'll get barriers, you'll get all the stuff if you're in an interverbal universe. Whereas if you're in a scientific universe, you're strapped to the evidence. And that means that you cannot cheat by making phony distinctions.
I wish you were right about science, by the way, because it's not that clear. And there's a load of, how can I put it in good English? Nonsense, is that a nice word, coming out from scientists who
nonsense might be a good word.
Okay, then I will use. I could have used a stronger word.
I'm not saying that there's not bad science or there's not junk science or that. It's just the attitude that we're looking to the world to give us a context of verification, a context of falsification. That is what the agenda is, not trying to stitch the words together to make coherent paradigms.
But
Okay.
William, the issue in science is a method, not a conclusion, and it is remarkably easy to get elaborate frameworks that are extremely specific, beautiful, gorgeous frameworks that are just pure nonsense. And this is something I'm dealing with lately as I'm diving in more into mathematics and mathematical issues, is you can really get yourself into a corner thinking you know everything in science, but then you're not really kind of, tracking as carefully as you thought you were with the actual evidence. You're constructing theories so elaborate that they no longer connect to reality. And we've had almost half a century of that. Physics has been in almost complete standstill on the theoretical side because people have gotten so abstract, so wordy, word to word in science, well, at least in terms of the funding, that it no longer connects with any kind of experimentation. And some physicists are even proud of it. They say, yes, we don't care what the experiment is. That's not science.
Terry, does that mean that they've become interverbal?
One second, Terry. You're excused because it's your birthday, but you've got to put your hand up. There are lots of today. You got away with it.
Okay.
But please put your hand up because there's people are waiting and it's not so. James, sorry to keep you waiting. James, are you with me?
Well, I thought that, yeah, okay, that's fine. I thought Augustine was ahead of me.
Oh, I don't know.
He'll get his turn.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Augustine. We'll get to you. Don't worry.
So I guess my comments were going to be I have comments on a couple of things. I don't want to kind of load it up. I guess the order in which things happened. Originally, you said something about everything is in time is a continuum, and I just wanted to. There's no boundaries in time, in other words, and I did want to mention there in chemistry, for example, there are chemical thresholds. There's specific places in time, specific times that need to take place before a chemical resistance will occur. A time for something to ignite after it has achieved a critical temperature. Time for a chemical, mostly a time for a chemical reaction to take place, any chemical reaction almost, to take place, given that the conditions for that reaction have occurred. So time is actually a measure, a boundary measure in actuality. And so this idea that time is completely abstract thing, that we can just say, well, it's a continuum, it doesn't have boundaries. We don't think about, or for practical purposes even, that we don't think about boundaries in time. Yes, we do. We think about we think about things like sunrise, sunset. Even, I know you deny a lot of physical occurrences, but this is the way most people think. Sunrise and sunset, birth and death. And I really appreciate the fact that you recognize death. You said you recognize death now. And the Big Bang, and the spring and the harvest, another example of time boundaries. And these primordial, I really recommend to people that they use history. If these primordial, like what I do is I always back up 10,000 years to find out, like whether I'm thinking straight. What would me, if I were existing 10,000 years ago, think about this? So, and you can choose any date you want. You could put yourself in ancient Greece or put yourself in the Renaissance. It's up to you. But I'm a Heideggerian. I back myself way out, and I think about, well, what if I'm in the Paleolithic, and I'm thinking about what I worry about as maybe I didn't have a religion yet, so I just worry about spring and the spring and the time for planting and the harvest. I'd worry about things like that, providing I was already a planter, providing I was already a farmer. So this is kind of like the way we use time. We use it for really practical purposes, and we use it with boundaries, always use it with boundaries. Somebody said on that same subject, and I will limit myself here, I'll just go one on another direction with the same subject. It talked about the boundaries causing cultural problems. I think it was, not sure if it was Julie, but the idea that we have to look out for the boundaries that are artificial. And I just want to mention that it's true that boundaries that are artificial and private are always a big deal. So in other words, if I have a boundary, I always check to see if it's a private boundary. Is this something that's just a cognitive bias of myself? But then you go a little further and check to see, is this just simply because I'm Catholic or atheist and so forth? Is this just because I'm I'm in a particular culture that I have this belief in these boundaries? And and it can even be justice boundaries. I like that comment about justice. That was a lot of good comments so far. And then so that's all. I just wanted to mention that the difference between the differences between the really significant boundaries, like don't punch somebody in the face when you're having a conversation, and the ones that are kind of like, well, maybe I shouldn't impose my ideas on people from a different race or a different culture, or, you know, and things like that. Those are important because you have to examine the cultural bias that came into your life. And you also have to understand your private bias that you received of your whole, you know, basically your upbringing and your nationality and all that, everything that sort of brought us here. So that's just a couple thoughts about time and boundaries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Obviously, I never said that we don't have boundaries in ourselves. Of course, we know there's sunset and sunrise, but I would like to know exactly when sunrise is. Give me the exact split second when the sun rises, or when it goes down, or when
it changes every day. Yeah,
exactly.
It changes every day.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
But they know what there are people that publish it, and it gets published before the sunrise occurs. So it's scientific fact.
And it's different on wherever you stand on the face of the earth.
Melinda, Melinda, hang on. Melinda,
I can figure it out though. I can take the formulas.
Never mind.
And I can tell you tomorrow, you know, what it's going to be for the next week.
Okay.
So it's not different. That doesn't matter that it's different for everybody. The fact is that sunrise is a fact, and the non-precision of someone's observation of the future is not really a refutation that the future exists.
But that's the point of saying that time is a continuum, because you can't give me the exact split second when there's sunrise. There is no split second. They will give you a number, 6:34. Then go to 6:34, put your clock on and see that that's the sun. That's what I meant by continuum. We all know there's sunrise and sunset and time to plant and time to sow and time to sleep. We all, of course, we all have boundaries. That's what I said. But what are those boundaries? Where are they? If they're approximate, then call them approximate boundaries. I'm with you on that.
Ron, your logic employs Zeno's paradox. So in other words, we're back in I don't know what century it was, but it was over 2,000 years ago.
I know.
I don't think we have to always back up, you know, to that date, to over 2,000 years ago, in order to philosophize.
I don't say we have to do anything. I'm just saying that boundaries are approximate. And if they're approximate, it means that it's a continuum. If they're approximate, there's no exact point. That's all I made. I haven't said it's good, or I haven't said it's bad. I'm just saying that if time is a continuum, we don't know the difference between now and then, or here and there, and this and that. We don't know. What is the difference between here and there?
For practical purposes, in terms of what we can notice, even with equipment, we won't be inaccurate when we predict the time. We will actually be very precise. And in terms of like human experience, there will be no meaningful differences because of imprecision. So this argument, because imprecision has to cause doubt, or imprecision has to cause absolute continuity, that's kind of I think a false philosophical premise, and it's simply based on Zeno's paradox. There's nothing more than that.
Well,
but there's nothing original about it. But it's not practical in terms of like a pragmatic scientific attitude. That it is not.
Okay, thank you. But there is stuff going on in the chat which is very interesting. And could you please try and desist? Because if you chat, if you're typing away, then we can't get the pleasure of your comments. So please, if you can, resist tapping away and instead talk to us. It would be very, very nice. It's just, I mean, you don't have to, but I think it would be nice that we all hear what you want to say. Now, who did I say? Agustin.
Yeah, I think it's
Agustin and then Claudio, and yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to try to be as well very brief and very concise. So I want to share with all of you the thoughts of a thinker called, a French philosopher called Edgar Morin. And with Edgar Morin, I want to talk about his theory about thinking in systems. So
you disappeared.
No, completely the reality is to approach reality as if it were a system. And so in this way, I don't know, my internet is very bad, so if you don't hear me, please let me know. From his point of view, there were two kinds of systems. There is closed system and open system. And particularly nature would be for him a closed system because it always works in the same way. So a scientist could not only explore the effects in nature, the physics and the chemistry, but also can predict it because the system is always the same. However, open systems are social systems. So we can study, for example, social events. We got sociology, but from his point of view, you cannot predict because the human beings have free wills. So you cannot predict what are going to happen with them. They are open systems. Now, the basic idea I want to share with you is that from his point of view, systems were composed of several parts. Those parts have in theory boundaries. So does that mean from his point of view, there were boundaries in reality? Well, actually, no. Maureen said that that was a model to study reality. That reality was one thing and the model was other. The model is the way to approach reality. Now, I think this is close to what Melinda and also Julie partly say about using boundaries to understand reality. I think so, but at the same time, understand the critic that we might be saying that it's impossible to understand reality completely. Edgar Morin didn't say that. He defended more or less that how could I say this? He defended more or less that you can understand reality, but reality is boundless. So you're gonna be able to put everything in your head. You're going to have to organize it into a system and put boundaries in it. You can understand parts of it, but if you want to understand it the best way, you have to understand it as a system. So from my point of view, I think, agreeing with Maureen, I think, yes, I wouldn't say that there are boundaries, there are not frontiers, there are not boundaries in reality, but they are the way in which we structure reality. Whether we accept the idea of a structure everything into systems or another organization, doesn't matter. But really, boundaries, this is my conclusion, boundaries is a tool to distinguish myself from the otherness, and online from offline, virtual from face to face, and so on. But the real boundary, reality, the boundary really does not exist. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Agustin. Claudio and then Roland.
Yes. Yeah, I probably agree with you in a certain sense. Like, for example, time per se by itself, independent of the human mind, may not have boundaries. Because there are scientists that believe in an infinite past and there's an infinite future. So if you try to put a point on each side, in each direction, like infinity will just go right through it, right? But as time as a continuum, right? A continuum in space-time. That could be true in most cases until you, let's say, encounter a black hole, which has missing points. So the continuum kind of stops, right? So black holes are part of the space-time, right? You mentioned earlier in your talk about an event in the future, something happening. It's not in the future because by the time it happens, then it's part of the past. That's true in most cases, but there's some events that are in the future that actually do exist. They're written in stone. So they exist as a future, so they're kind of like a boundary, kind of like an intermediate boundary between the infinity and the present. For example, I'll just give you just one example. The death of our sun, right? It's going to happen. It's a future event that exists. Like the laws of physics and the arrow of time guarantees that our sun will eventually die, and maybe we'll die along with it, unless we manage to find a different solar system. So regarding the falling down, one more thing, cancel culture. You mentioned the statues, the tearing down the statues. So this particular group is kind of like making the boundary of the history kind of narrower, shorter regarding the Western culture, especially like Princeton University is another example. You mentioned it. They want to get rid of the Greek and Roman classics, so they're kind of like eliminating the history, narrowing the boundaries of history. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudio. Every time I talk about the future, I get somebody tells me, but the future exists. We know it exists because it's the future. And all I'm saying is, I know there is a future. And all I'm saying is, we will not know that we got to it until it's the past. Now, it's all very well saying, I know I'm going to die. But when you do, you won't know. You just won't know. Somebody else will, but you won't. Now, the fact that you're saying that eventually the sun will blow itself up, etc., we know that. I say no in inverted commas, but we won't know it until it happens, in which case it's actually too late. We will never get to the future. The future will be the past when we get to what we thought was going to be the future. It's fairly simple. I don't see how you can say that the future is written in stone. The only thing that's written in stone is the stone that we look at that's already been written. The future cannot be written in stone. The future's not here yet. And in fact, will never be here. That's the point. Not yet. Sorry, made a mistake. The future will never be here. We will never get to it. It's sad and it's upsetting, I know. But as I keep on saying, I have not promised you a rose garden in these talks. You haven't come here to have a good time. You come here to have your minds bent, to be annoyed. That's why I'm here, to annoy you. So far, I'm succeeding. This is great. So now, thank you, Claudio. Roland, go for it.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Great. Okay. My turn to be annoying then.
Yeah, used to it.
Okay, well, I suppose in my sort of attempt to simplify things, one of the first things that I ask myself is, where does difference happen? You know, if we're talking about boundaries, we're talking about the difference between things. So where do those differences happen? There's 25 people in this discussion, and we all have our views about difference, and we all have our experiences of difference. But from our individual perspectives, where have we learned those differences? Where do they come from? When we say, oh, there's a difference between this and that, where is that difference happening? And my answer is, it's happening in our consciousness. It can't be happening anywhere else. And we can test that out. We can try and find someone where a difference hasn't happened in their consciousness. And I don't think we'll succeed. So my starting point is that difference arises within consciousness. And given that, we have to ask, well, what is it then? What's happening when we see a difference? Well, I think a difference can only be seen if it endures over time in some respect. Now, I'm not saying it stays absolutely the same over time, but you can't, if, for example, you saw a difference at one point in time and never again, I don't think you'd see it as a difference, because there would be no continuum. There'd be no sense of a prolonging of that difference. So we have here the idea of difference over time. So then what about, how does that difference arise in consciousness? Well, thinking about it in a sort of fairly simple way, I would say that if I am making a difference, then I must have a behavior that's making that difference. So now I'm going on to this idea that difference is a behavior of consciousness. So in other words, we have this ability to create difference, but it is a behavior. And that's quite an interesting idea, because behavior, we can only express a behavior that we've already got, which implies that we can only make differences that we've already got the capacity to make. Well, that kind of sounds obvious. But when we start thinking about, well, okay, we're actually seeing all these differences in reality, and we're discovering these differences in reality. At that point, there's a huge clash, because it seems to me that even if there were differences and there was a thing called reality, we would not be able to see those differences unless we had the capacity to the behavior basically in us to notice it in the first place. So this kind of puts a different spin on the whole idea of difference, and also what it means to see difference, because I feel there is a distinction here between the behavior that allows us to see a difference and what that difference looks like. Because when we perceive a difference, we're not merely invoking a behavior from the past which has led to that perception, we're also making a prediction. It's like if I'm walking along pavement, I am behaving as though the pavement is going to stay there, as though gravity is going to stay there. There's a whole host of things. I'm behaving as if they're going to carry on going, because I have these behaviors in that anticipate what might happen to me next. And those anticipations are like patterns of how I would see things unfolding. But they are directly linked to how I behave, to what behaviors I have. So I really can't see a way of removing the behavior of consciousness from the idea of making distinctions between anything. I just can't see a way of doing it, because I can't find, and I would challenge anyone else to find, a way of testing it. How do we test that a difference exists without someone noticing it? I don't see how we do that. I'm very happy to hear any opinions on how we might do that. If it's simply a matter of going, well, okay, Fred can see this difference and I can see this difference, therefore that difference must be real. I don't accept that, because that doesn't really tell me anything about reality. It merely tells me that both of us are apparently dividing up the world, or what our experience, in a similar way. And I can see that happen on two laptops running the same operating system. So that doesn't tell me anything about the idea of there being some separate, absolute or natural difference that I'm actually trying to discover. So I really can't get out of this. I can't get out of this idea that we are we are exploring. When we explore differences, we're exploring differences in our consciousness. We're exploring differences in how we behave. And behind that, there is a very, very interesting question, which is what distinguishes me from anyone else? Maurice mentioned this earlier. What does distinguish me from anything else? Somewhere in me, I must have some knowledge of what it is to be me. Some, you could say, reference against which I can compare other things and say, well, actually, this bit is me and that bit isn't me. So in a sense, I would boil down that to some concept of self-organization. So I see consciousness as a self-organizing process, and we are able to make difference between ourselves and other things by the fact that our organizational states are different. So we don't respond in the same way. So when an influence comes to us, we do not experience it as integrated with our current setup. And therefore we experience a dissonance with it. And that we then translate into a pattern of behavior over time, which I see as what a difference is. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Ronan. I see it differently, because I see it always in the mirror of time. So when you say, when we anticipate things and we walk along the road, we anticipate it's going to be there. When we get up in the morning, we anticipate that the floor will be there when we put our feet down. Now, I see that as a consequence of our memories of it happening before. So when we walk along, we remember, and I say in inverted commas, we remember that we walk along and the pavement stays that way. we remember it. And if it doesn't, we will fall off. And that will go into our memory. And next time we're going to be very careful when we walk along with it. So I see it very slightly differently. And that's how I see the continuum working, because what we anticipate is what we remember. And what we remember loops back to what we anticipate. It's a continual movement from the past to the future to the past, etc., etc. And I leave out, Melinda, I leave out the now and I leave out the present. There is no present in any of that. There's only the past, and the past brings us forward to things that we remember. There is no present in any of that. That is very important in my particular theory of time, and in my mind, it seems to work. I have never found myself in the present. I'm not talking about spiritually, and I know this is a big thing. The now, the present, live for the moment. There is no moment to live for. It's a continuum, and those who are spiritual won't like me saying this, but I don't care. But you see what I mean? It's the past that counts. It's the only thing there is.
Yeah, but can I just respond to that? By and large, I agree pretty much with everything you said there. I think that the future is a bit like a map of our expectations that are derived from our behaviors. Because why would we have a behavior if we didn't expect something to happen? I mean, we wouldn't have it, would we? So the behavior that we would have now, I'll use now because I can't think of anything else to say. The behavior we'd have now, like taking the next step along the pavement, carries with it an assumption of what will happen when we do that. And those two things to me seem to me inextricable. They are like two facets of the same gem, as it were. And the moment you change one of them, you change the other one. And the interesting thing, of course, that happens is what happens when your expectation does not tally with what you experience. Then we end up with a dissonance, and that provides us, and this is, I find this particularly interesting because it's central to my work on behavioral change. There is this dissonance between our expectations and our current experience that forms the energy, the tension that enables a change to happen in our behavior. And then, so we have this feedback loop as you describe. Thanks, Anyway.
Thank you very much. James, do you still have your hand up? Is that a new hand or an old hand?
That's a new hand. I'm willing to wait though, since we have other people that want to speak.
No, it's okay. I think you're next. It's okay.
Okay. I have a couple of new topics from your talk. One I guess was nothing. Just the only thing I have to say about that is there's a problem with nothing, and you know, I think we agree that nothing is not nothing. There's a problem of people injecting nothing with content. So nothing is a very good concept. It's very useful. You can use it in language to explain the difference between an idea and something that is not an idea. You know, something that is a computer and not a computer, and so forth. But you can also use it to talk about, and you can also use it to talk about non-existence, and you can talk about the difference between, you know, the difference between things. So something not existing, like the non-existence of the color red and so forth, in a particular picture, or in a particular object. But it's important for us not to inject meaning and existence into nothing, because I think that's a bias. The idea that nothing contains everything that we don't know, or in other words, if I don't know what the future holds, then the future is nothing. You know, that kind of thing. So I think that's a kind of like a logical error we make. And then in terms of this idea of skepticism. Because I sort of think Roland was a little bit. I see what Roland was talking about that way a bit. That because we don't know because we don't. We tend to distrust our truth. In other words, truth, maybe you can arrive at a position where there is no truth. But barring that, the idea that you believe something is true, you even agree with if something is true, like Roland was talking about, yet because the idea was in your mind, you doubt it, because we shouldn't trust ideas that are in the mind. And my objection is that everything is ontical. Everything exists in the mind. Everything that we look at, everything we perceive, everything that we already know is basically a mental object. So it's like you could call it an ontic substance. So there's no exceptions. Everything is held that way. So if you distrust it on the basis of it occurring in the mind, then that becomes a basis for distrusting everything. Of course, I know the emphasis here is on psychology, and I'm just saying, personally, even though I'm very interested in psychology, I want to. I think you need to erect a kind of a barrier between. There should be a little barrier between philosophy and the sciences. Not that philosophers can't be scientists too, but that and I understand you are a professional psychologist, Roland, but I think there has to be a kind of like a disinterest. There has to be a disinterest in one of those. And if you're already dedicated to behavioral psychology, then you should sort of like back off a little bit from making psychological predictions about the existence of, philosophical predictions about the existence of truth based on your psychological belief. I think there is room for psychological belief, but I think the skepticism is always a danger when we don't believe that truth exists, or we don't believe that time exists in terms of, except for the memory, except for the past. Really, that's a crutch, Ron. The idea that time only exists in the past. Of course, it exists in the past because you remembered all that. So you have tremendous personal verification that time exists in the past. But for you, time doesn't exist as present or future, and that's kind of taking the easy way out. The future is contingent. The rest of us say the future is contingent. It's going to happen if we still exist. I think that's basically the point you're making, or the point you're giving as a refutation. The future will exist only if we exist. So therefore, in your logic, it does not exist. So I'll stop right there.
Thank you very much. But that is not my logic, though. That's how you read my logic. I've got to get back to time. People won't let me do this thing about time. I've got to do it again. Time exists. I'm with you. Sorry, not time. The future exists. I'm with you. Okay, we agree. Now, we will never, yeah, I know, terrible, isn't it? We will never get to it. I'm not saying there's no future. I'm not saying that. Please note for the future, please note, the future exists, but we will not get to it, because when we get to it, it will be the past. We will never get to the future. Never. That's all I'm saying. The future exists, but we won't get to it. The only thing that I know, and I can't say the word no, the only thing that I feel that I work on is what I remember, and might remember badly, and it might be a false memory, and the past is memory. That's a very important point. The past is memory. It's nothing else but memory, nothing else, because my memory is as false as anybody else's. And I guarantee that tomorrow, if we all meet and talk about what happened before, i.e. the future before, we will disagree about what people said. We will disagree about what happened here. and it will all be the past, all of it. And nobody can tell anybody else that that did not happen. He'll say, but I remember it happening. You say, but I remember something else. So there is no real past. There's only the past that we remember. Oh, I got excited.
So we have truth issues. You know, it has to do with existence. We have truth issues.
We definitely have truth. Everybody has truth.
But that's not. I think it's a mistake to make truth issue into a time issue or a temporality issue. So that's you know, that's I think where the problem occurs, is if we don't completely agree on things, that doesn't mean that there still isn't an objective truth available.
To whom?
I'm not saying that anyone believes it. I'm just saying the idea that there can be an objective truth about something could actually occur even when two people disagree. So I think that's kind of like another kind of like reason for doubt and skepticism. Yes, people are going to disagree, especially if there's only two of them to agree, and it's going to be very easy for them to disagree, and they can have different memories because they are different individuals. So it's kind of like, in terms of like reality, it's just like A equals B. It's just the idea is like you can't, or A is unequal to B. It's just a fact of life that disagreement and difference. Somebody was talking about difference. Maybe that was Roland. Difference occurs. So but it doesn't negate the fact that people can agree on what the truth is. So and this is really easy when it's about what happened last Saturday. Yeah, sure, that's easy. But then it's a little bit more difficult when it's at what boiling point, and after what delay will iron and oxygen turn into iron oxide. So that's the kind of like truth that's a little harder to get at, but it's truth nonetheless.
Okay. Who's got? Who was? Debbie, you had your hand up, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Oh.
But there were people before me, so
it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. More males than females. So.
I've got every time somebody says something, it raises questions and things to say. Then there's more and more. So I'll relate to, and the past, as James just said, things that happen further away, then you tend to forget. So I'll relate to what Roland said about the behavior patterns, and I'm not sure I'm reflecting accurately what you said, but it did remind me of Kant's idea about his knowledge and about the pure forms of reason, that for him the way to get to knowledge and the way to view the world, to get to the truth, would only be through his pure forms, which are space and time. And this is the way that can perceive that you can get to the knowledge of the world, which is only through internal internal reason, human reason, which means the patterns, the world, the empirical world is actually bound to our reason, human reason, to see the world in patterns, like I think called it behavior. But what Kant actually meant is that we cannot actually grasp what reality is, or the thing that is itself, which is not connected, not related to us, but this is the only way that actually reason shapes the way, the empirical world, the way that we see it. So we can only grasp the world through our internal patterns. So for Kant, or if I go to your example of walking on the pavement, and I don't expect the world to disappear, or I know what will happen next. It is not because of how the world is. This is because of how reason shapes the way that we see the world. We cannot reach, or reason cannot reach, something that is transcendental to itself, and that actually gets back to the limits of reason. And for Kant, it would mean that that we could only see or grasp or comprehend, and true knowledge could only be the connection, or the connection of reason, of our minds, with the empirical world as is seen through the pure forms. That's what Kant calls it, the pure forms of time and space. And that's why science uses these causal connections and patterns. That's why science is a better, or the best way to reach knowledge, and other forms are not, because we cannot get to anything that is metaphysical. Kant would have problems with truth, concerning immortality or freedom, or God as well. So and that also related what you talked with about what Popper would say about expectations, and that relates to what you said about difference, that there's no real difference in the world. If I understood you properly, that the difference is internal. It's something that we can see it. It is not anything in the outside world, if I understood you properly. So I think that's also what Popper would say, that our expectations, or every scientist, would have to have an expectation to test, a theory to test. And that is something that you can see or not see. You just test it. But you won't go in, I think also Popper in his very famous article gave the example of animals in nature who divide the world to what they can eat and what they can't eat, but they don't see anything else, because this is how they see the world. And I think that's also that's how we see the world as well. And I think also perhaps when we wait for somebody, when we're expecting somebody to come, so the world is the people who look like that person and people who don't, which when we're not waiting for that person, we don't notice these differences. So I'm not sure if that's what you meant about differences that are not in the world, but our behaviors, are internal, are something that is within us to see, but not outside, beyond us, without any expectation, without any internal behavior. That's
Thank you very
Shall
much.
I reply to that?
Yes, please do. Yes, Rogan.
Cool. Thanks very much for that. Yeah, there's, I suppose the main difference I can see there is in possibly what I would call a framework of the framework of how I see these things happening. And I think I'm quite similar to Ron in this, because I see the framework as about time. It's this idea of isness, what is a real problem. At any particular moment, we can talk about what is. I mean, here is my cup. But what does that mean? As far as I can see, isness is closely related to testability. And one of the interesting things which if we start to compare the future with what for want of a better expression, I'll call now, or the present. I know that that's anathema to you, Ron, but
can you say approximately now, and I'll be happy.
Approximately now, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So testability happens when our expectations. It's like if I threw a ball to someone to catch, as the ball approaches them, they are configuring their expectations of where they need to be to catch that ball. And so there is a whole load of stuff going on. There is a prediction about where they need to be. There's a prediction about where the ball is going. There is a present moment behavior that is triggered by these predictions that allow that person to relocate themselves to where they think the ball will land. And there will be a something. I'm not going to call it a moment because Ron's going to shoot me. There will be a something where the probability of that happening rises to a very high level, and then it vanishes into the past. And that is the moment of testability. Did it happen or didn't it? The problem with did it happen is that we then have to recreate now our memory of what's happened. So that's happening now as well. We can never go back into the past and identify that. So there is a big problem about is happening outside our consciousness, because there is no way of testing it. There's no formulation for it. So when we start talking about what is going on outside our consciousness, we're into nonsense. What we can talk about is what might happen next. There's no problem there, because we know that there's an unfolding of things. And of course, the fundamental principles that lie behind science are about prediction about what might happen. They are not actually, I mean, I know it is cast into the form of what is, but that's almost like a sort of metaphor. What's really people are interested in is what's going to happen next, or what might happen if I do this. So to my mind, the framework in which we assess all these different things that are happening, like, you know, objects, behaviors, phenomena, they are all about what might happen. So in other words, they are cast into a future of possibility that may happen. And in that future, we move towards it. We are continually moving towards the future we've constructed, like a sort of, I don't know, throwing a stepping stone down and stepping onto it, and then another stepping stone and stepping onto it. And each time we throw a stepping stone down, we are basically identifying what we are predicting will happen next. And that next might be in a millisecond time. It might be in 2 years' time. We may still be acting on that behavior in the present. You want to book a holiday in 6 months' time, you may have to act on that right now, so that you're laying the foundations for something to happen in the future. So as far as I can see, this, what we call the world, reality, whatever, is basically a framework of the future. It is a conceptualization of probability, and we are continually rolling onto it. This idea of the things in itself, reality in itself, I can't buy that, because it can't be got to. And I think one of the things that is key to this, and I suppose I keep hitting this particular boundary, I suppose, of what I could call testability. How do we test these things? We can talk about anything, and we can talk about the nature of reality, realityness. I mean, we can say the words, can't we? How do we get to it? What is the difference between just thinking of the idea and actually somehow getting to it? And I think that is what I would describe as sort of confluence of our rolling continuum of approximate now and our expectations of the future. And when those two match, we get an experience of integrity. Our behavior is working. It's unfolding accurately according to how we predict. When that doesn't happen, we get dissonance. We get a sense of that our behaviors are not integrated with the unfolding of time. So I guess that's the way I'm looking at it. It's how do we get to these ideas like reality, like existence, and so forth? What do we mean by them in terms of something that we can actually, that can be part of our moment by moment experience? And if I have an idea where I can't get to it, I don't know what to do with that. What do I do with it? Reality as it really is, what do I do with that? I can't act on it because I can't get to it. I can't rely on it even. So it becomes a kind of nonsense idea. I can certainly see the idea of isness as being a metaphor for what might happen. In other words, you might say, well, it's probable that this sequence of events might happen, so I can give it a state. I can call it something. And like an object in object-oriented programming, you can give it a name and a label and sort of allocate a bit of memory to it. But that's not doing anything, is it, until the processing is happening? You can only actually interact with it as we go through life. So anything I can't interact with, anything I can't actually get to as and test, my question is, why would I believe that? What is the value of that as opposed to something else? And I think there is a perfectly serviceable model which gets rid of the idea of isness and instead builds a model of probability of what might happen in the future. I don't. There is an idea I've been thinking about recently. Terry might have some feedback on this. I was wondering about the guidance systems in self-driving cars and the intelligent systems required to do that. And I'm kind of imagining, whether this is true or not, I don't know, that a car must create in its programming some internal map of its future progress and the various objects that, am I right there, Terry? Okay, cool. So there must be some, in its guidance system, it's creating a map of how the objects around it that it's detecting will happen over time. I guess you could call it them fourth dimensional objects because they're basically 3D objects over time. And so it will then be continuously receiving information which it turns into its own type of object and thus creates its own map of reality. And then that map will be informing its present actions, and its present experience of whether that map is coming true for it will be informing whether or not it needs to change its behaviors and change its predictions as well. So the whole thing is like a feedback loop, continuously updating and changing and maneuver. I think actually the self-driving car is a pretty good analogy. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Ron. Very, very interesting indeed. Armin, you've been waiting a long time. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still there.
Okay.
I don't want to start a new debate because I think we probably do not have the time, or I don't have the English skills to answer. No. But I just want to comment on the implication of boundaries of human life and sort of like rate them. And I think they are 5 out of 5. I think it's very good that we have limitations. I can't fly without a proper object that like gives me the ability to this, and I can't overcome death. And I think it should stay like this, even though some people are working on anti-aging and stopping diseases to grow in the body or to even exist. I think it gives the sort of time where you do not have to deal with death immediately because everyone is alive around you, more meaning than it would have if concepts like death or aging would not exist at all, and everyone would just stay at the age of 30 and would not ever experience the age of 90 or the age of just getting older. And it sort of like comes to my mind when famous musicians, for example, die. It doesn't really seem that they are dying, but more like they are getting more famous and their life begins at the point when they die. And in my generation, it's like rappers become famous when they die. They are not famous when they are alive. They are famous at the point they are dead, but not before. And I think it's very obscure because why? Why do people need someone to die to become famous and not accomplish their skills before they are dead? And I think without death, that would not exist. And I think it's good that these concepts are present and that we can't overcome them, and that should stay like this.
Very interesting. Thank you, Armin. Very interesting.
Thanks.
Very interesting point of view. Melinda and then Michael. Melinda.
Thanks. I just want to make a couple of quick comments, Roland, back to what Roland has been saying. I want to hone in a little bit on this idea of dissonance, which interests me because, as I understand it in the English that I speak and know, the syntactical baggage of a prefix like dis means something that is not aligned, or something that is out of the pattern, which interests me creatively, that the use and effect of fiction is to create dissonance in order to broaden the scope and field of the capacity to think, and the capacity to deal with realities. And then it occurred to me that, there was those famous experiments where they put glass on the top of a table with an edging on it, and they put cats on the table, and the cat wouldn't step on the glass because the cat could see the floor. Also, there is some bridge somewhere, some pedestrian bridge somewhere, that was made of see-through materials, and people stopped at the edge until they cognated about whether this was safe or they were going to fall to their death. So the point that I am coming to here is that within this realm of what we're talking about as boundaries and truth, it certainly are enculturated perceptions of boundaries, as well as our internal life force, whatever those physiological conditions are called. So it interests me, dissonance interests me because it creates an energy of adversity. And an energy, again, I come from an aesthetic point of view. I come from an artistic point of view. So I think about, why is there art? You just said about music, about rappers, Armin, you said rappers are not necessarily known until they die, which, some of that is communication, some of that is the communities in which you communicate. And some of it is things coming, awareness coming after the fact or before the fact. So so I'm just adding to this concept of boundaries in the capacity of mind, which I appreciated, Roland, you talking about the ability to recreate. The capacities of mind from an artistic point of view are to create things that don't yet exist. The capacity of fiction is to create stories that seem real that aren't real. And I wonder where the initial impulse of creating unrealities in which we derive human pleasure, or creating unrealities to see what other beings do with not real, that is real. And so I go back to this syntactical thing that we have certain cues in our language that tell us whether to privilege certain information or not to privilege that information. Whereas from an aesthetics point of view, we experience what is before us, or what we are immersed in. And those experiences in my little world break these supposed boundaries of predictability. That yes, in our daily work, in our daily world, we assume that if the floor is under you at this step, the floor will be still in front of you because you see it. But if you're blind, you don't see it. But if you're deaf, you don't hear it. But if your eyes don't see color, then you don't see color. We think we see color. How much color is there that we don't see because we don't see it? Does that make it any less real? We can't prove it, but people who are artists know the difference in, I guess it's refractive light, between blue and green blue and teal and azure and aqua, and here comes the sunset. And when does the sunset, by color radiation, arrive at sunset? Doesn't sunset mean that it is perceived as setting? It is going past a boundary, depending on where you live in the world and how many mountains or trees are between you and the coast. So how do we even approach I think it's a fallacy that we have as thinkers to try to approach this general truth. It doesn't mean that there aren't steps along the way that happen in a certain order so often that we rely on that. But then you put the glass down on the step instead of wood, and you hesitate because we don't know if that's solid or fiction. So I just want to throw in that fiction is a possibility of the human mind and of animal mind and of plant mind. I don't know another word for that. Consciousness, trees will grow their roots down to where the water is. How do they know the water's down there? Well, they have a sense that my feet don't have. I can't tell you if I'm standing on water unless I'm in it and it feels wet. So I just want to throw in there the possibility of expanding our, I like scientific method, don't get me wrong, but I'm not a scientist. And so I think that there has been, since the beginning of human time and sentient animals, the creation of things that did not exist before, because it came into our, don't know the word, to create something that was not true that now is true. And so I love it that we have to cogitate on these really big questions like what is reality and what is truth and what is time and who gets to decide what those things are, which is, the basis of all liberation movements is that one's experience is equal to others' experiences, that it's not majority predictability that determines reality. It determines reality for those who believe it. And we just don't know what we don't know yet, but we create things of fiction that are things we don't know yet. And so that's my thought about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Melinda. Can I just go into a second when you talk about fiction? I don't know the difference between fiction and reality. I just don't know. What is not real about fiction? Does anything happen in
Are you
fiction?
actually asking me that?
Well, all
or
right.
are you just posing that question?
I'm throwing it out, but I can ask you. I mean, fiction are things
I was
that
going to
happen.
answer.
Pardon? You want to answer
I'll
it?
let others respond. Yeah.
Okay, Michael, you want to answer it? Did you
Yes.
say? Yeah, go, good.
Responding on Ronald's question about self-driving cars, my area of expertise happens to be research on detect and avoid systems. So this is the same thing as for self-driving cars, but except this is for unmanned aircraft. And what these systems typically do, they operate in 8-dimensional space rather than 4-dimensional. So for, say, every second, they simulate another 4-dimensional reality for some look ahead time, like 2 seconds ahead, 2 minutes ahead, for instance. And they simulate how its own aircraft, own ship will move in 3 spatial dimensions and in time, and how other aircraft will move. And it does it every second. For every second, it's refreshing this reality. And it makes the best decision about what my aircraft has to do to avoid collision. And I think this could be in part the answer on your question, Ron. What makes it a simulated reality? The fact that it is folded in our actual reality. It's a way to make sense of our reality. And detect and avoid systems, of course, they're doing it for different purpose than what we are doing in art. And as Melinda mentioned that in art, we also are creating our simulated reality. But of course, it's not for the purpose of avoiding collisions, but maybe it's not exactly a different purpose. But in broad sense, the purpose is to make a better sense of ourselves, of our life, to make maybe better decisions, and maybe even there is some aesthetical sense that this aha moment when I got something. And even if this something is just the beauty or something else, it's still it's a pleasure that we find in this simulated reality. But there is a bigger question is that can it be that our whole reality is simulated reality that we assume which is real, because it's based on our subjective experience, right? And we have no other independent window in our reality as through our senses and through our perception, right? So my view of this is what I call subjective materialism. So I fully understand that the source of my understanding of reality is subjective, my subjective experience. But when I relate it with the different parts of these experiences with each other, and I find some consistency, some patterns in this, and I just make a conjecture, and I understand that this is just a conjecture, that there is some real material world behind it, which I can accept or reject this. It's up to me. But if I accept it, at least tentatively, it makes a lot of sense. It simplifies my whole process of dealing with this reality, whether it's subjective or not, making decisions, and it makes it, well, it just makes everything easier and makes me overall happy and more effective and more productive. But then there is this question about how do we test what we see from this reality, and the issue of scientific evidence. And this is a tricky question, because we can only test and call it a scientific evidence what is repeatable. So the science is all about repetition. It's not even about our ability to make predictions, because we can make a correct prediction one time, but this is not a proof that we were right. We could just have a lucky guess. But if we can predict something every time, and if others can make the same predictions consistent with ours, then we call it a scientific evidence. And in order to have this evidence, this thing that we are trying to test, it has to be repeatable by nature. So we cannot make predictions about things that are unique, that only happen once, or that change every time and change in some random way. And the problem that we have is that this predictability, it has only a very narrow area of our experiences. So it's mostly limited by physics, and not all physics, because physics also includes a lot of random stochastic processes, and it has to rely on probabilities to describe them. And even within the physics, quantum mechanics may be not predictable. We don't know yet. And for most issues that are most important to us, it's how to deal with other people. It's social systems. They are not predictable. They are very rapidly evolving. And so using scientific evidence for making these decisions that are most important to us about how to deal with other people, in most cases, we cannot do this. And this is what makes our life so, say, difficult and problematic and contentious, that we cannot rely on science. So is there any substitute for science in situations like this? And I would say maybe yes. It's communication and cooperation. So if we still can find something that we can agree with each other on some issues or some solution, or our understanding of reality, this is not a scientific evidence. But in most cases, this is good enough. And this, of course, is related to the issue of the boundaries. What is good, what is bad, what we can do, what we cannot do. It's all tentative, but it's all based on this our shared reality and shared understanding of this reality, even if it's not based on scientific evidence and cannot be. But sometimes it can get very wrong and very ugly, and that's why we can get this fascism or communism or this totalitarian governments, when people come to agreement with each other, but this agreement is wrong. So it leads to very bad decisions, bad outcomes. But again, that's the nature of our world, that we don't have absolute rules. We have no way to be 100% sure that what we are doing is right. But most of the time, this cooperation and communication between people, it works rather well, and we can rely on it. Unfortunately, not always, but what can we do?
Thank you very much, Michael. Trevor, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
I was just, I was thinking of this from the perspective of, like, if you look at physics, and if you're trying to do something kind of high end in physics, like flying spacecraft outside of our solar system or splitting atoms, if you don't know the distinction between Newtonian physics and special relativity, you're not going to be able to accomplish certain higher end things. So if you look at reality the same way, if all of us are operating on a simplistic model of reality, then I think it makes sense that we're not going to make much progress in discussions like this. So, for example, Michael said that our reality is simulated, which is obviously true. But then when people are discussing the contents of reality, they don't realize that what they're discussing is simulated. So if the model you're using to discuss something is flawed, like it leaves out important considerations, then you're not going to get anywhere discussing it, which is kind of the case. Like this discussion we're having here today, it's been taking place for, in a sense, thousands of years. And it occurs every day on the internet, these types of discussions. But the model everyone is using is simply wrong. So I don't think we can expect anything other than chaos and perhaps just kind of accidental, maybe marginal progress, I think. And if you look at the most sophisticated model that most people kind of agree on nowadays is science. But if you look at science only deals with a very small portion of all of reality, but it represents itself and is perceived as being sufficient for considering all of reality, but it's clearly not. Yet people believe this. So it seems to me we're just kind of stuck, confused, and we don't realize it.
Oh, I realize it.
But I would say that you can reach a state of mind where you can realize it. But then someone else mentioned system 1, system 2. So you can realize it in a system 2 slow conscious reasoning, but you can't realize it in a system 1 state of mind. You can't distinguish between reality and perception of it when you're running at system 1, or at least not at all times. You can realize it in system 2, but once this meeting's over and you're out in the real world dealing with high volumes of input, you lose this state of mind, and you can no longer, this knowledge is no longer accessible, right?
I agree with you, and I think it's very hubristic of us to think that we're going to we're going to solve things. We will solve some things, but to think that we're actually now in 2022, after all this time, we're actually going to, this is it. We're going to work things out and we'll understand it. I don't think we will. I think that what we're trying to do is to get ourselves to understand what the problems are and think, okay, we have problems. Now let's see how far we can get. But to think that we're going to solve them, I just don't see why we would think that. Just because we've reached 2022, it doesn't mean anything. It means that what we're looking at are perhaps things that we cannot solve. We cannot solve because we're human, possibly. And perhaps we should accept the fact that we're not going to solve everything, or perhaps we're not going to solve most things. And as some people have said here, that we have to deal with what there is in our own reality. And I, as you know, do not accept there is such a thing as reality. We can't get to it. If we can't get to it, then talk about it existing is on another level that I don't.
But you're falling victim to the very phenomenon right now as you speak, because you're saying we're not going to get there. You are reading the future.
Yeah.
This is a simulation of the future. No. It's not the actual future. So you can't stop it even when you're in system 2 mode of thinking. I
agree.
But so pervasive is the illusion.
I don't know about illusions. I think that illusions are okay. If illusion is an illusion, then it's our reality. I mean, if we say it's an illusion, then I don't know where we are. We can only think that what is happening is happening, right? And if I say, well, what's happening now is an illusion, then I don't know anymore what's going on, because if I'm an illusion, I know it's an illusion, then somewhere over there is the real thing. And I don't think there is a real thing. There's no real thing because we can't get to it, never.
But saying somewhere over there is a real thing, you're presuming there is an over there.
No,
maybe
I'm
there
not.
isn't.
No, I'm not. That's exactly my point. I'm being.
That's my point too.
But we agree. That's what I'm telling you. We agree.
We agree on some things.
No, we agree on this almost precisely, approximately, right?
No, but you're saying, but it seems to me that you are asserting that there are necessarily hard limitations on how far we can go. I'm saying to you that is a simulation, that you have knowledge of how far we can go.
You have knowledge how far we can go?
No, I'm saying that you are asserting that there are in fact limitations to how far we can go.
I don't know. No, I don't.
Okay, but that's what it sounded like you're saying.
Oh, sorry.
That we cannot proceed. But I'm saying that if we want to proceed beyond what we're accomplishing today, it seems plausible that a prerequisite step is to formulate a sufficiently sophisticated model. For example, special relativity. Once you figure that out, you need that base to go higher in the levels of understanding, like special relativity.
That's okay, but every base we come to is temporary, because there's going to be.
But we've been at this one for 2,000 years. This one, and we won't proceed past it.
Which one, and why won't we?
The one where we will not take the distinction between reality and perception of it seriously. We will acknowledge it, but we won't take it seriously.
Okay, I don't mind. I don't mind that. I mean, I'm beginning to accept what I know. What I know, I can't accept. If you see what I mean, I understand that everything is moving and shaking. I understand that. I mean, no, it's not that I understand it. I understand that something's happening, but that I'm going to be able to know what is happening. I realize that is not going to. That can't happen. I mean, why should it? Why should it?
But you're saying something cannot happen. You don't know that. This knowledge is an illusion.
I say it's temporary. I don't know. I don't know.
No, but your knowledge is
No, I get you.
Could I
right.
say something?
Okay.
Because it strikes me that the problem here is that in order to say that there will be a point reached where we know everything or we solved everything or whatever it is, at that point you've got no change going on. So if we assume that a point will come where there's no change, then fair enough. But if we don't assume that, if we assume that we're living in some kind of continuity of change, then we also have to accept that what happens next is unpredictable to a certain extent. And therefore, the only thing we can really do is improve our ability to adapt to change. Because we will not know what will happen next. We won't know what new theories will appear that will actually unify things in a different way, or better models might appear that will enable us to make better predictions. We don't know these things, partly because we won't know them right now anyway, but also partly because we don't know what might happen in the future. We don't know what influences may come upon us that will affect us in different ways, and how those influences will either make us be able to see the things differently, see new differences that we can't see now, or indeed have some other effect upon our ability to function or to remain as integrated beings, if that's what we are. So there are a number of imponderables here, but I think in the center of them is if we're okay with assuming that change will happen. If we start off with that premise, then we have to accept that the probability is that our present state of integrity will be affected, and therefore we will have to adapt. So that, to me, is the only thing I can hang on to as an idea for how we will evolve, or what's useful from my point of view anyway, is what do I need to do in order to retain my sense of integrity, whatever that looks like from time to time? How can I adapt to change? I mean, Stephen Hawking used a similar definition of that for intelligence, the ability to adapt to change. And I'm not really finding it hard to disagree with that. I'm finding it easy to disagree with that, sorry. It seems to be a pretty good definition.
What if you don't have the ability to, what if it's possible to develop the ability to adapt to change in a highly optimal way, but if you don't discover that ability, if it isn't discovered and the implementation of it spreads throughout the planet, then you might get pockets of achievement like yourself, but it doesn't spread throughout the entire system, thus limiting the optimal state of the system.
I'm not sure the system has an optimal state.
Optimal being the maximum that is possible, which is distinctly different from perfection. Can you agree that there are some states that are better than others?
I think someone has to make that decision to say that a state is better than another.
But it's subjective. Children dying of malnutrition in third world countries, is this optimum?
I guess it depends upon what your measurement is. I mean, we all die. I'm going to die one day.
We all die at the age of 5 because we didn't have enough food.
Some people do die at the age of 5. Some people die before they're born.
Right. Is that optimal?
I think it depends on what optimal means.
Well, of course.
You know, no one wants it to happen to them, do they? But life carries on. I mean, every time I walk out into my garden, I see a battle of life and death going on. We don't.
Okay, but is it okay? So then, should take this style of thinking and apply it to a different area, like vaccines. Should I get a vaccine? Because I'm told that it if I do not, it introduces risk into the system, i.e. other people could die. Is this a big deal? It's a matter of opinion if that's a big deal. So can I reject getting a vaccination because it's a matter of opinion if other people die. People seem to think this is not a matter of opinion.
Well, you're into surely a question of whether or not the influence that's coming on you is dissonant or not. So basically, you're dealing with an influence that is bearing upon your sense of integrity, and then you have to work out how to adapt to it. That's intelligence.
Yeah, and this is what I'm talking about. How shall we organize the agents within this system, the agents being you and me, such that they behave in a manner that kind of yields an outcome where everyone's reasonably happy, not fighting with each other, not dying at the age of 5, so on and so forth. I'm saying to achieve these things, I propose that it's plausible that if we have an insufficient model of reality, that we will not be able to achieve that which we could with a good model of reality, is what I'm saying.
I don't really see the idea that there is some sort of optimal standard for everyone to sort of get to. I don't know where that would be.
Most people can distinguish between, most people have a preference between someone dying or not dying, right? You can't see that difference, but a lot of people can, right?
I'm aware that a lot of people have all sorts of opinions about things, but I'm aware from my point of view that I seem to be mortal, and I think I'll die someday, and I don't really see any point in being worried about that, because
no, I know, but lots of people.
But that isn't that something to do with how we approach every day of our lives, and something about what life is about for us.
Right.
So that's a kind of quite personal thing, I think. I don't think we can assume that everyone else shares that viewpoint. I certainly know many people.
No, they're not going to. They're not going to. But I think it's useful to know things like some people think a baby dying is a bad thing, but then there's other people like you that have no opinion either way. This is an important distinction, that some people think life and death is important, other people think it's not important.
But that's Trevor. As far as I can see, you're looking for some sort of harmony, and I came to the conclusion a while ago that harmony is not really good for us. I think that dissonance is how the world works, a clash between different opinions or different whatever. It's dissonance that keeps us moving forward, not harmony.
It's not a binary though. It's not harmony, true, false, dissonance, true,
false. I agree. But it's still dissonance.
Yes, of course. It's unavoidable.
Well, in that case, why look for harmony? Harmony quite harmful. I think there would be no progress if there was harmony.
Well, why do you pursue things that you enjoy then?
Why do I pursue things I enjoy?
Yeah, because why do you do things that make you happy if it makes no difference, if it makes you happy or not? Why do you choose things to make you happy instead of, for example, driving nails through your hand? They're both the same thing.
Well, no, I don't like pain. Other people might. And
okay,
are they wrong?
Right. So in harmony, if there's less pain, less pain, is it not a better thing?
Not for the people who like pain, no.
Okay, but how many people is that?
I don't know. I'm sure there are loads of people who like pain. In fact, I know there are. I mean, they thrive on pain. Now, I can't tell them that they're wrong, can I? I mean,
no, but I mean, I guess our way of another phenomenon I notice is that if someone proposes a path that can lead to improvement, rather than it invoking curiosity and motivation there seems to be something about the human mind that when someone introduces a proposal of a path to improvement, rather than a desire to go there, what instead arises is an aversion to an opposition to making things, which is completely counterintuitive. So I think a model should have details like that where you can have a reminder that when you're discussing something, if a good idea arises, a plausibly good idea arises, be mindful that your mind will, rather than having a positive reaction to it, be mindful that the mind is probably going to have a negative reaction. It will fight it. These are useful things to know about the mind. I mean, that's just one of them. There's thousands.
I can't disagree with that. But Roland asked, what is progress? And you know what progress is, and other people don't. But progress, for one, is something completely opposite
So
somebody else.
I'm saying, but the model must reflect reality, and so look at the dark ends of reality.
But whose model? Who's going to make the model?
Make a group effort of it.
I haven't seen that group efforts have been that successful, by the way. I can give you many.
Neither was flying the airplane in the first couple days of it. Now they're pretty good.
Perhaps it would be the model that can best predict approximately the future, or
potential futures.
Testable. Potential futures.
Yeah, like the range of possibilities that might manifest in the future. And the future is controlled by, where does the future come from? The future comes from the human mind, because the human mind controls how people behave. How people behave in physical reality controls how future reality unfolds, right?
Not all of it.
Reality comes from the mind. So if you don't understand the mind, should you be surprised that the way physical reality manifests is not your life?
James has been sitting really patiently, and
thank you,
and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ron. Yeah, I loved everyone's contribution. I think this is this has been a great discussion. Debbie, thank you for bringing in those insights. Michael, great, what a great engineer, and kind of a little bit. He raised up the issue of reality, and kind of like the, you know, how science can be used in reality. And I just want to give my definition of philosophy, and then I'll give some reasons why I believe this. I believe philosophy is a way to cognize reality using science as a totality. That's my idea about philosophy. And of course, I have biases. I think I know the answer to who has best insight, what school of philosophy might be one to look at and not ignore as having insight into the future, and insight into how truth is and how truth evolves and how truth can be used in science. And that's Martin Heidegger. I think he was the very best at talking about those subjects. But I'm just dropping that like a bomb. You know, I realize that it's not like a very popular statement.
No, not really.
No. Well, I'm willing to debate someone on that. But my real issue is this idea about reality, the model that Trevor was talking about. Trevor, very deep thinker, as is Roland. Trevor is really pragmatic, though. The difference is that Trevor's ideas are extremely pragmatic. He's very results-based thinker. And he wants to kind of like get out of the model or shift the model if possible. And I think maybe some people don't realize what the model is, but Trevor does. Trevor knows. It's Plato. The idea that, you know, we can only look at reality and sort of like discuss it from where we are, and be wrong about the essence of reality. And that's a Platonic idea. That's the 2,000-year-old idea that you're talking about, Trevor. And I don't think that's what reality is. Reality is something that we need to be deadly focused on all the time, in my opinion. I don't think we should confuse reality with what we're thinking at any particular time. That's not what reality is. So I think if you take this idea that there's a thinking that doesn't depend on reality, then that's kind of like the deadly pill. You've already swallowed the deadly pill. we're not going to get to the new model if we believe that there is a thinking that doesn't depend on reality, or that there's a thinking that's going to rescue us, from our inability to cognize reality. There's a debate about this in the 17th century, and I think people like ignore that debate at their own risk. The idea that, there's a empirical reality, but how do you get at it? In other words, if we try to make a decision about the reality, we'll make a mistake, that we could possibly make a mistake. That was David Hume. And I think that was Michael's point of view. Even though we have all this science and we can be so accurate and so forth, we can actually still not get things exactly right. But that's not what science is for. Science is for discovering things about aspects of reality, and it's nothing more. And philosophy can be a science too, because philosophy can be a science of discovering things about how the human mind and the human existence, how human existence operates in the world, and whether there's a division between human existence and the world. So Heidegger didn't think so. Heidegger didn't think there was any division between human existence and the world, that the world is something that humans have. And without human existence, we don't really need to think about the world, because we won't be thinking. So this idea that thinking is the way to solve all the problems is half right. It basically is the only way that you can sort of like decide anything, but it's not what exists. What exists is the world. So science has to be done in the world. And the idea that there's that the model has to, I just completely agree with 3/4 of what you said, Trevor. This is like, what you have to do is not, if you really believe there are two different worlds, right? There's one up here and there's another one out there, then at least soften your view a bit. Realize that you're a participant. You're participating in this world, and it's going to condition you. You've got to look out for those private and cultural biases. You've got to sort of like put out some boundaries, like you say, Ron. That's the best idea. One of the best ideas we've had to deal with today is your idea that there has to be boundaries. Well, there has to be boundaries, and we need to set up boundaries. But at the same time, the boundary cannot be between mind and reality. There's no boundary there. It's basically because reality conditions everything that the mind thinks, and only because of what the mind thinks are we ever able to change what there is in reality. So that division is one that is artificial. That problem was settled in the 17th century, and which Debbie's aware of. And we shouldn't be proceeding as if we call ourselves scientists, or if we call ourselves interested in science or science supporters or anything like that, we shouldn't be interested in trying to continue this myth that intelligence or thinking is separate from what exists. It is what exists. It is part of what exists. And it's our tool for determining what exists and determining the future in all the ways we do. Not only the future as what will exist, but the future as what we intend. So yeah, I'll stop there because I don't want to go into aspects of different sciences and stuff, but that's just the basic thing, is that science has to proceed not on the Platonic model. It has to proceed on a progressive model of accomplishment and justice And a lot of the things that Trevor is concerned with, I agree with. That there have to be human concerns taken into account along with the scientific, but we need to eliminate the subjective preeminence. We need to make the world preeminent along with the existence of humans, as a continuous dialectic, as our friend George Gonzalez would say.
My footnote to that is, where is he? There you are. You keep on. My footnote, James, is that you're going to hate the book I'm writing now. You're going to hate. You're going to hate it so much that you're going to stick pins into my effigy. You're going to stick pins into me. That I can tell you. But that's just a footnote. That shouldn't worry. Shouldn't worry.
Do you have a doll you sell on your website?
Yeah. I'll send you a doll, and you put pins in. By the way, you won't be the only one. Bill, your hand is up, right? I can't hear you.
Ron, I've kind of listened to everything, and it's been a wonderful discussion, I must say, in terms of inspiration and all that. I wanted to propose that reality, as I've heard it today, is our falsifying context for our ideas of how the world works. It's the test source for the truth of our ideas. Isn't that an effective way to define reality instead of the broad, multiple, dynamic theory that is global or international or universal in its scope? Reality is what we use to test our beliefs about the world, no? I'll just ask you to react to that.
It's a very nice way to end this discussion. By the way, maybe we should have another discussion about reality. We had one once. I think people were throwing things at each other. Lucky we're on Zoom. But maybe we will. If anybody's got anything else to say, if not, I'm gonna wrap this up.
I was going to real quick just answer the question a little bit. Yeah, I don't think we should fetishize anything. We don't fetishize mind. Don't fetishize reality. Don't create a separation between two worlds. Don't fetishize that. As far as the test goes, that's exactly right. We need to test reality, and we need to test our concepts and verify them as much as possible. Some things that are just concepts can't necessarily be verified. In other words, if I accept that the Platonic model is wrong, that we need to trust reality, that we need to trust our recordings of reality, then both instrumental and mind-based. Those are basically those are actual tests that you can conduct. So I think skepticism that testing is impossible because all testing happens in the future and stuff like that. That's not useful in science at all. Science couldn't possibly take up that aspect. As a matter of fact, testing in science, especially if you're like in the computer business, like I have been, it's continuous. You're always testing. So testing is a continuous activity. Doesn't take place in the past, but it's what's important is how it's taking place right now and how it's being planned for the future. So the tests are absolutely crucial. Yes, the planning is the issue. How do you plan the future? That's the big issue, and that's the big question confronting science, in my opinion.
And I wanted to suggest maybe a topic not exactly about the nature of reality, but about what to do when we cannot completely rely on science, or when we are dealing with some aspects of reality that cannot be at all or cannot be yet scientifically tested, but we still have to make decisions and we have to deal somehow with this. And this seems to me like a more practical aspect of this, because probably we will never know how real the reality is and what is its nature, but how to deal with these uncertainties about this reality. That seems to me an important question.
Very, very nice. Thank you very much. I just want to finish with one small saying. Great minds discuss ideas. Average minds discuss events. Small minds discuss people. We can all decide which minds we are. So thank you very, very much, everybody. I look forward to seeing you next month, first Sunday of the month. And keep up the good work, all in our own realities. Bye, everybody.
Okay.